Imagine being sentenced to actual prison just for sharing a cartoon of a girl holding an umbrella.
Right. I mean, it sounds totally made up.
It does. And now imagine the only entity that's actually capable of proving your trial was a complete legal sham is, well, it's a stack of artificial intelligence models.
Yeah, it really sounds like the premise of some near-future dystopian thriller, but it's actually the blueprint for today's deep dive.
It really is.
We're looking at this massive collision between state power, academic freedom, and honestly, the surprisingly advanced analytical capabilities of modern AI.
Yeah, so today we're doing a structural scan on a really, really unique set of sources. We have these extensive AI-generated legal evaluations for models like ChatGPT, Copilot, and DeepSeek, right?
Exactly.
And these AIs were fed a very specific stack of legal documents regarding a complex systems researcher. His name is Dr. Chen Jingyuan.
Right, and the documents are intense.
Yeah, we're looking at his self-defense and accusation letter from prison, along with the actual court verdicts that convicted him and the paperwork from his dismissed appeals.
So our mission today for you, the listener, is to unpack how domestic Chinese law and international human rights frameworks intersect, when a scholar's online activity is suddenly criminalized.
Right.
We want to understand the exact legal boundaries here between maintaining public order, protecting academic freedom, and upholding fundamental human rights.
But, okay, before we go any further, we got to make a really crucial disclaimer.
Yes, very important.
This deep dive is a normative legal assessment of the provided texts. We are absolutely not taking political sides here, nor are we independently verifying the facts of this specific case on the ground.
Right, we're acting as impartial observers.
Exactly. We're impartially exploring the legal frameworks and the structural arguments presented in the source material exactly as the AI models analyze them. So for the sake of this legal theory exercise, we're just assuming the events described in Dr. Chen's letters and the court docs are entirely true. We're looking at the architecture of the law itself.
And because we established that baseline assumption right now, we don't have to keep repeating the word allegedly for the rest of our conversation.
Right, totally. That gets so repetitive.
Yeah, so we're simply examining the theoretical reality constructed by these exact documents.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because before we can start applying, global human rights standards, we first have to understand the specific charges on the ground according to Chinese domestic law.
Which is where things get really interesting.
Right. So according to the documents, Dr. Chen was arrested and convicted of a charge known as, get this, picking quarrels and provoking trouble.
Yeah.
And the underlying behavior that actually triggered this charge was just him forwarding, commenting on, and liking online posts.
Literally just social media activity.
Exactly. And this included sharing art, some political commentary, and academic thoughts.
And the procedural realities he describes in his prison letter are, they're intense. He details this arrest first, find evidence later approach.
Which is wild.
Right. Like no arrest warrant was shown at the time he was taken. His family wasn't notified for days.
Wow.
He faced continuous 24-hour interrogations. His trial was completely closed to the public. And then his subsequent appeals were dismissed without so much as a hearing.
See, placing that list of events next to the Chinese Constitution creates a massive contradiction.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the Chinese Constitution explicitly protects freedom of speech under Article 35. It protects personal freedom against arbitrary detention under Article 37.
Right.
And it guarantees human dignity under Article 38. So this charge, picking quarrels and provoking trouble, it sounds to me like a legal junk drawer.
A junk drawer, yeah.
Ugh.
I like that.
You know that drawer in your kitchen where you just toss the batteries, the tape, and whatever else doesn't have a real home? It feels like a pocket crime where authorities just toss any behavior they find annoying, but, they can't strictly categorize it into a specific legal box.
That's a perfect analogy.
But if the Constitution explicitly guarantees freedom of speech and protects against arbitrary detention, how does a conviction like this physically happen in a courtroom? Doesn't the Constitution instantly trump a junk drawer charge?
Well, in many legal systems you might be familiar with, yes. Like in the United States, for example, a defense attorney can base an entire argument on the First Amendment, right?
Right.
And a judge can strike down a criminal charge just by applying the Constitution directly. But the foundational difference here is this concept called justiciability.
Okay, justiciability.
Yeah, in Chinese courts, the Constitution lacks direct justiciability. Judges simply do not invoke constitutional articles to decide criminal cases. They rely strictly on the specific statutes written into the criminal code.
Ah, okay. So the Constitution is functioning more as like a guiding national philosophy than an actual usable shield that a citizen can pick up in a courtroom.
Exactly. It operates in the background.
Yeah.
But even ignoring the Constitution for a second and looking strictly at the domestic criminal code, the AI models analyzing this case pointed out a severe structural flaw.
Really? What kind of flaw?
Well, treating non-factual opinions, art, or academic thoughts as rumors violates a core principle of both domestic and international law. It's known as nullum crimen sine lege.
Nullum crimen sine lege, which means...
No crime without law.
Okay, but explain how the AI actually identified that. Like, what's the mechanism of that analysis?
Yeah, so large language models are, they're incredibly good at semantic mapping.
Okay.
So when ChatGPT or DeepSeek processed the statute for picking quarrels, they noted that the law is historically intended to punish the deliberate spreading of factual lies.
Like actual rumors.
Yes, actual rumors that cause physical public panic. So the AI then mapped that definition against Dr. Chen's actions, which were just sharing academic opinions and art.
Right. And art and opinions are definitely not statements of fact.
Exactly. Therefore, expanding a statute meant for factual lies to punish subjective thought, it stretches the pocket crime so far that it breaks the principle of legal certainty.
Wow.
The law ceases to be clear and predictable.
That makes a lot of sense. So we have this really profound tension in the domestic law between what the Constitution philosophically promises and how the criminal code is stretched in practice.
Yes.
And when domestic law fails to protect a citizen, our sources tell us we need to zoom out. We need to look at the philosophical foundation of global law, which is the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
The UDHR. Yeah, that 1948 Foundational Declaration is essentially the bedrock of modern international law.
Right.
Article 1 establishes this vital moral baseline that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights.
Which is a beautiful sentiment.
It is. But it's not just nice poetry. It establishes that dignity is the actual moral source of the law. The legal system exists to serve human dignity.
Right, so human dignity doesn't exist just to submit to whatever arbitrary rules the state decides to write that day.
Exactly. And the AI analysis zeroes in on a concept here called institutional humiliation.
Institutional humiliation. Let's dig into that.
Let's look at the mechanics of what Dr. Chen experienced. A 24-hour interrogation isn't just a tactic to make someone tired so they confess.
Right, there's more to it.
Yeah, when a system strips a citizen of their right to sleep, denies them the ability to notify their family, subjects them to verbal abuse, and basically decides their guilt before evidence is even gathered. It strips the individual of their subjectivity.
It's dehumanizing.
Completely.
Oh.
Turns a human being with agency into an object to be managed and broken by the state.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second here, because I'm really trying to picture how this works in practice. Dignity is a beautiful concept for, like, a university ethics class, but it feels incredibly abstract for a gritty, real-world courtroom.
I get that.
How do you actually prove dignity was violated in a legal sense? A defense lawyer can't just stand up in court, point to their client, and say, "Your Honor, my client's dignity hurts."
That is the exact hurdle international law had to solve. And it's something the AI models mapped out beautifully in these documents.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Dignity isn't measured by a feeling. In human rights law, dignity is operationalized through due process.
Due process.
Right. Due process is the physical, measurable manifestation of dignity. We see this explicitly in Articles 9, 10, and 11 of the 1948 Declaration, which guarantee the right to a fair public trial and the presumption of innocence.
Ah, okay, so the procedural rules are the actual metric for dignity.
Exactly. So when a trial is secretly closed to the public, or when an appeal is rejected outright without a hearing, the AI models identify a massive shift in the system's objective.
It's not about justice anymore.
Exactly. The system is no longer seeking justice. It is enforcing control. The denial of due process is the legal, admissible proof that dignity has been violated.
Wow.
So the AI evaluations concluded that Dr. Chen's procedural reality represents a fundamental failure to recognize him as a subject with rights.
That makes perfect sense. Philosophy and dignity are the essential foundation, but let's be honest, states ignore philosophy all the time.
They really do.
If this framework is going to have any real teeth, we have to move past declarations and look at binding contracts. Which brings us to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights.
Yes.
And this covenant provides a strict, almost mathematical test for state power, doesn't it?
It does. And China has signed the Civil and Political Rights Treaty, making these standards highly relevant. Article 19 protects freedom of expression, but, and this is important, it does allow a state to restrict that expression under certain conditions.
Right.
However, the AI models stress that a state cannot restrict speech simply because it finds the speech annoying or politically inconvenient. It must pass a strict three-part test.
Okay, let's go through the test. First is legality, meaning the restriction must be based on a clear, predictable law,
Right.
which we already know the AI flagged as a problem due to the vague nature of the pocket crime.
Exactly.
Second is legitimate aim. So the restriction must protect something specific, like national security or public order.
Yes.
And third is necessity and proportionality. The restriction must be the absolute minimum necessary to achieve that aim, and the punishment must fit the crime.
And proportionality is where the AI models really tore into the structural integrity of this conviction.
So let me try an analogy to explain proportionality.
Go for it.
Let's say there's a mosquito in your living room and it's annoying you. Swatting it with a rolled-up magazine is a proportional response. But if you bring in a literal wrecking ball to swat the mosquito, even if you argue you have a legitimate aim in, getting rid of the bug, the method destroys the entire house.
It ruins everything.
It completely fails the proportionality test.
That analogy perfectly illustrates how the AI evaluated the state's actions here. The models scanned the court verdicts and the evidence logs, and they noted that the state claimed a legitimate aim of maintaining public order by stopping the spread of rumors.
Okay.
But the AI found absolutely zero evidence in the documents of actual severe public disorder caused by Dr. Chen's online posts.
So no riot.
No riot. There was no panic.
So using the wrecking ball of the criminal justice system, secret detention, continuous interrogation, and a prison sentence is wildly disproportionate to the act of liking and forwarding posts that cause no real-world harm.
Exactly. And this failure of proportionality triggers a violation of Article 9 of the treaty, which prohibits arbitrary detention.
Arbitrary detention.
Right. And the AI models emphasize a critical nuance in international law here. Arbitrary does not just mean illegal.
Wait, it doesn't?
No. A detention can be technically legal under a vague local statute, like that junk drawer charge of picking quarrels, but it can still be deemed arbitrary under international law if it's disproportionate, unnecessary, or unjust.
Wow. And the AIs didn't just flag this as an isolated mistake by one rogue judge, right? They flagged it as a systemic issue.
Yeah, that's the thing. When an AI model processes a case, it looks for patterns of behavior across different actors.
Okay.
The models noted that police arrested him without a warrant, prosecutors approved the charges based on totally stretched definitions of the law, trial judges closed the courtroom, and then appellate judges dismissed his appeals without hearings.
So it's everyone.
Right. That level of coordination to fast-track a conviction without ever applying the proportionality test, it indicates a programmatic failure of justice. It's a structural stress fracture, running all the way from the police station to the highest courts involved in his case.
Which brings us to the most unique and honestly the most surprising aspect of this entire deep dive.
Yeah, this part is wild.
This case isn't just about political speech or public order. It's about the very specific nature of the evidence used against Dr. Chen, which brings us to a third major framework, the International Treaty Protecting Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights.
Right. The documents reveal a totally fascinating detail about what kind of information was actually criminalized here. Part of the evidence used to convict Dr. Chen of spreading rumors was the fact that he shared an artistic cartoon.
A cartoon.
Specifically, an image known online as the Umbrella Girl.
So he was literally sent to prison, in part, for sharing a drawing.
Yes. And the AI analysis across all the models, ChatGPT, Copilot, DeepSeek, they all strongly zeroed in on this specific piece of evidence.
Why is that?
Because under the Cultural Rights Treaty, art is recognized as a protected form of expression.
Okay.
The AI identified a fundamental logical flaw in the prosecution's argument. Art, by its very nature, relies on symbolism, metaphor, interpretation. It simply cannot be judged by a metric of true or false.
Right, because it's not a news report. You can't exactly fact-check a cartoon of a girl holding an umbrella.
Exactly. Therefore, logically, an artistic expression cannot constitute a rumor. A rumor inherently implies a false statement of fact.
That makes total sense.
Right. So by criminalizing the sharing of a cartoon under a statute meant to stop false information, the legal system is fundamentally violating the right to participate in cultural life, which is heavily protected by Article 15 of that treaty.
Wow. And the legal logic gets even more disturbing when you look at how the authorities viewed his academic background.
This is perhaps the most concerning part of the legal reasoning analyzed by the AIs.
Yeah.
The authorities argued in the documents that because Dr. Chen is a highly educated PhD researcher in complex systems, he, quote, should have known better than to share these posts.
Wait, what?
They literally used his advanced education as proof of his malicious intent.
Hold on, I have to push back on that logic. They used his PhD as evidence of malice.
Yes, they did.
If anything, doesn't a researcher's job explicitly require them to look at controversial, unverified, or fringe information specifically to study it?
Exactly.
That is exactly what a complex systems researcher does. They look at massive amounts of messy data to find patterns.
You are hitting on exactly what the AI models identified as a gross violation of international law. Using a person's education level to presume guilt is what the law calls a discriminatory presumption.
A discriminatory presumption.
Right. It violates the core principles of non-discrimination. The legal system is essentially saying, because you are highly educated, you are inherently more guilty than someone who isn't.
It weaponizes a scholar's own expertise against them. That's terrifying.
It really is. And the AI analysis highlights the massive chilling effect this logic creates on academia as a whole.
Oh, absolutely.
Academic freedom requires the breathing room to explore wild ideas, to synthesize conflicting information, to be wrong sometimes, and to look at controversial things without fear of arrest.
Yeah.
So if sharing complex, nuanced, or artistic ideas is criminalized as provoking trouble, and your PhD is used as the legal justification to lock you up, it destroys the environment necessary for scientific and cultural progress.
It's the wrecking ball again.
Exactly.
But this time, it isn't just swinging at one person's freedom. It's swinging at the entire concept of academic inquiry.
Under the Cultural and Academic Rights Treaty, the state actually has a positive obligation to create an environment where science and culture can thrive.
Right.
Criminalizing the process of gathering and discussing information does the exact opposite. It forces scholars to self-censor. It completely freezes the intellectual development of the society.
Man, let's synthesize everything we've uncovered in this structural scan.
Okay.
We started with the domestic reality. A vague pocket crime used to arrest a citizen for sharing online posts, which created a really stark contradiction with the Chinese Constitution's own guarantees of speech and liberty. We saw how judges bypass the Constitution by relying strictly on statutes, stretching the definition of a rumor until it breaks the principle of legal certainty.
And then we looked at the 1948 Foundational Human Rights Declaration, which taught us that dignity is operationalized through due process.
Right.
The 24-hour interrogations and closed trials weren't just procedural errors. They were forms of institutional humiliation designed to strip Dr. Chen of his subjectivity and turn him into an object of state control.
Next, we applied the Civil and Political Rights Treaty and its strict three-part test. We found that using the wrecking ball of secret detention and prison time to swat the mosquito of online posts completely failed the proportionality test.
Right, which rendered the detention arbitrary under international law.
Exactly. Finally, we saw how criminalizing an artistic cartoon and weaponizing a scholar's PhD as proof of malice constitutes a profound violation of the Cultural and Academic Rights Treaty.
It replaces the presumption of innocence with a discriminatory presumption of guilt based solely on education.
So, if the facts laid out in these documents are true, this single case represents a stacking systemic failure across domestic constitutional intent, philosophical dignity, civil and political rights, and academic freedoms.
It really touches on all of them.
It does. And why does this matter to you, the listener? Well, it matters because the legal boundaries we've explored today affect the global flow of information.
Absolutely.
The legal precedent that defines a rumor versus academic exploration or art shapes the environment you live in. Whether you're a researcher digging into a niche topic or you're just sharing a meme online, these frameworks dictate what is safe to think and what is safe to share.
Yeah, these treaties aren't just old pieces of paper. They are the necessary mathematical guardrails that keep state power from expanding infinitely and crushing individual agency.
Which leaves me with one final, completely new thought for you to ponder as we wrap up this deep dive.
Oh.
We've spent this entire time looking at how large language models analyzed a highly complex human rights case.
Yeah.
Right? And it makes me wonder about the role of AI in the future of law itself.
That is a massive frontier. I mean, we're so used to discussing how states might use AI for surveillance or to, enhance their control over population.
Exactly. But look at what happened here. An AI model instantly cross-referenced a single obscure local court case against the entirety of global human rights treaties.
It did.
It processed the semantic difference between a rumor and a cartoon. It spotted systemic failures, procedural abuses, and discriminatory presumptions in a matter of seconds.
It's incredible when you step back and look at it.
So how might this technology eventually change global legal accountability? Could AI become the ultimate impartial auditor of human justice systems?
Wow.
Think about it. A scanner that looks at the massive imposing structure of state power and instantly highlights every single stress fracture where human dignity is being compromised. It's definitely something to think about.